Hey guys, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be checking out what I think are some of the custom setup options that I think for newer players are going to be more important, and we're just going to not even worry about the more complicated ones. So this video is going to be for the beginning players on which custom setup options are going to be the ones you're going to want to focus on the most, and which ones are not really that important right away. I get this question asked a lot in my Twitch streams from beginning players who don't really know how to set their cars up. And a lot of what they tell me is that they don't know what any of these things mean. They don't know what they do. And they just, they don't want to start playing with anything because they don't know what they're doing, which is completely understandable. I'm going to kind of break this down. There's really only three things. In my opinion, there's really only three things that you need to pay attention to in this. We're going to go over here, Tune Vehicle tab. Now, the only things, in my opinion, that you're really going to need to worry about as a beginning player is your alignment, your damping, and your springs. Those are the only things that you need to worry about as a beginning player to start familiarizing yourself with how to set the cars up and just making the cars easier to drive in general. So when you first go into your tab, you're going to start off at alignment. Now, the only things I think that are going to be the most important is going to be your camber angle. So your front camber and your rear camber. In my opinion, your front and rear toes, those can be important, but I don't think that they're going to make that much of a difference. Your toe angles are... The only time you're really ever going to want to worry about toe angle is going to be your rear toe angle in rear-wheel drive cars. Other than that, it's not really going to make a whole lot of a difference. And for right now, we're just worried about your basic setup stuff and, just getting the car to handle better in corners. So the only thing you're going to want to worry about is your negative or your front and your rear camber. So typically what I like to do is I'll run a little bit more negative camber in the front than I will in the rear. And so what this is going to do is this is going to, as you can kind of see on the graphic on the right hand side of the corner, when I go from one all the way to the other, you can see how the front tires will slightly change their angle. So that's going to give you more grip in the corners. So, if you're going at a speed and you find yourself sliding off to the side of the road, this is going to help with that. And that just has a lot to do with how the weight transfer shifts and how the geometry of everything changes in your car. But that's not important right now. The only thing we're worried about right now is trying to get more grip in the corners, which means you can go through corners faster. The downside to any of the negative camber is that you do lose a little bit of a grip in the straightaways, but we're not really worried about that. You're not going perfectly straight very often in rally. You're mostly turning, and in corners is where you're going to gain more speed than you will in the straightaways. So we're not too worried about that. So in this instance, what I like to do is I put a little bit more camber than I will in the rear. So in the rear, for instance, this one right here is at -2. I'm going to maybe put the rear at a -1.5. And the reason for that is, and again, depending on the chassis layout, this happens to be an all-wheel drive car. So for me, this is what I do, and that just has to do something with your torque bias, which in this car, you don't really get that option. But again, not important. Not important. The only thing we're worried about here is front camber and rear camber. That's all we're worried about. So then we're going to go over to our next tab, which is going to be damping. This is one thing that I know confuses a lot of people. It used to be worse in the first dirt rally because you had you had slow bump and you had fast bump. Actually, let me rewind that. You do have fast bump in Dirt Rally 2 also. However, it's not in as many cars as it was. So in this car, it's an older car, so you only get slow bump and slow rebound. So what we're going to want to do here is for slow bump, a lot of people get confused about what slow bump is versus what fast bump is. So the way I like to describe it, Slow bump is when you're turning your car. So if you're driving your actual car in real life, if you're going, say you're taking a corner at about 45 miles an hour, as you turn, you feel the car kind of tilt a little bit. That's your slow bump. So, and then your fast bump is, say, if you go over a speed bump or something like that, just a really quick compression, that's your fast bump. So without getting into it too much, that's basically what it is. As if you're taking a corner at speed and you feel that car shift its weight, that's your slow bump. When you hit a speed bump and it's a real quick jar, that's your fast bump. Usually what I will like to do is on my slow bump, I'll usually turn it down to -2. And that's just going to give your car a little bit more leeway. Now, again, depending on what location, these are just things that I like to do. So this is going to give you a little bit of a softer ride, and you're going to get more stability out of it. You're going to lose some precision in your steering, but again, it's rally. You're doing a lot of sliding around anyway. So, pinpoint accuracy steering is not exactly what we're going for right now. We're just trying to make the car more stable and easier to drive. So to do that, I always drop the slow bump down to about -2. That's kind of my standard. I'll tweak it from here and there, depending on how the actual car is or where, whatever location I might be at. The other confusing part is your rebound. In Dirt Rally 2, we only have a slow rebound. In the first Dirt Rally, we had a fast rebound also. I don't know why they took that option out. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I wish they still had that option in here, but that's beside the point. So your slow rebounds are going to control how fast that spring decompresses after the spring has been compressed. A higher slow rebound rate means that spring is going to take longer. I mean, they have a little description right here. And so all that means is that if you're in something really rough or, say in the Spain locations, you're doing a lot of turning, a lot of this and whatever else. If your slow rebound is too soft, your springs are going to decompress too quickly and you're going to cause a car to be very unstable. So usually, again, what I do is I'll just take my slow rebounds and put them up to 1. And that's all I do. That's this right here. This exact setup that you see is 95% of my setups for damping. Now let's go over to the springs tab. Now this is where it's going to get a little bit more confusing. Obviously, ride height, pretty self-explanatory. What is not explained very well is that your ride height is correlated with your spring with your spring rate. So what that means is that as you raise the car up, the suspension has more distance to travel. And so as you raise the car up, you can also adjust the spring rate to be a little bit firmer because you've got more suspension travel until the car bottoms out. And so I don't know how in-depth they went to it in this game, but in real life, as you raise the car up, the spring rate will actually kind of go down. So as you raise the car up, you can raise the spring rate up as well, because if you are raising the car up so high because the surface is rough, you're probably going to want to raise your spring rate up too, because otherwise all that's going to happen, it's going to cause a very unstable car. So there's that. And again, same thing, if you lower the car a lot, you do need to make sure that your spring rate is firm enough that you're not going to bottom out, but you also need to make sure that it's soft enough so that you can still get a little bit of body movement. Because again, what's not really well explained is that your spring rate is more directly related to your slow bump and your fast bump. So as you make this spring rate firmer, your slow bump is also going to become firmer. So if you're running a very, very stiff spring rate, say all the way, you're going to want to take and make your slow bump a little softer than normal. Because as your spring rate goes up, your slow bump also goes up. And they don't do a very good job of explaining that, but that's just something to keep in mind. So as your spring rate goes up, you're also going to want to lower your slow bump And as your spring rate goes down, you're going to want to bring your slow bump up. And that's just going to make sure that the car stays evenly balanced for the most part and keeps everything stable. The next part is your anti-roll bars. And again, same thing, ride height, front, back, spring rates. One thing I will suggest is try to keep your spring rate a little bit softer in the rear. And that's just going to make sure that the rear end of your car stays planted, and then you can kind of avoid some unnecessary or surprising oversteer. Because as the spring rate gets stiffer, obviously those back wheels cannot stay in contact with the ground. They're more likely to lose traction and just be uncontrollable. So I always like to keep my spring rate a couple steps lower in the rear than I do in the front. Now the next thing is going to be your anti-roll bar. So what this does is, you know, if you know anything about cars, it kind of makes sure that everything is even. And this can tie into oversteer and understeer and all kinds of stuff like that too. But again, typically, same thing with the front. You're going to want your front anti-roll bar a little bit stiffer. It's going to help with some steering. It's going to cause a little bit of instability in the front. And you can play with that to your liking. Typically, I don't really touch the anti-roll bars much, depending on what it is. Again, in a rear-wheel drive car, I will take and I will lower this because, again, you only have power in the rear wheels. You're going to want to keep those rear wheels firmly planted on the ground so you don't find yourself spinning in a corner or in a bumpy section where you might have to make a slight turn in that bumpy section. But that pretty much only applies to rear-wheel drive cars, which actually brings me back to alignment. For rear-wheel drive cars, you're going to want to keep your toe angle, not negative. You're going to want to keep your toe angle positive. I do it in a rear-wheel drive car. I do it anywhere between 0.4 and 0.6 degrees. That's going to make sure that your rear end is not going to want to slide out on you too much in a corner. That's just for rear-wheel drive cars only. Everything else, you can keep it at a +2, and in the front, you can maybe go -2, maybe. It's not very necessary. For the most part, I leave it at 0. And again, this is just for beginners, you know, so a quick recap. The only thing you're going to want to worry about is your alignment, damping, and springs. That's it. We're not going to worry about brakes. We're not going to worry about differential. We're not going to worry about gear ratios, any of that. It's just alignment, damping, and springs. That's all we want. So again, in alignment, put some negative camber in there. A little bit more in the front than in the rear is going to help you. When it comes to damping, turn your slow bumps down. It's going to give you a little bit more body shift in the car, and that's going to help with grip in high-speed corners. Slow rebound, and that's just going to control the springs decompressing. Again, keeping our car more stable, easier to drive. Springs, you know, ride height is going to depend on location. Spring rate also going to depend on location, but just remember, as you raise your car up, you can also run a slightly stiffer spring because it's going to have more distance to travel. Anti-roll bars, again, don't have to mess with them a whole lot, so I wouldn't worry about the anti-roll bars as much. As far as the spring category, ride height and spring rate in front and rear, try to keep the ride height even front and back. There are some reasons as to why you may want to have a little bit more in the front, a little bit more in the rear. But again, that's more of an advanced setup thing. Right now, we're just worrying about the basics. Again, location determines ride height. Spring rate is kind of based off of ride height, as well as your slow bump in the dampening. Once you've made all the changes you want to make, hit apply tuning, and you're off to the stage. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Leave a comment down below if you thought that I forgot anything, or if you have any further questions. You can leave them in the comments. I'll try to do my best to answer. Or you can always come and check me out on twitch.tv/roadsidetv. I'm live every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. playing Dirt Rally 2. You can always pop in on chat, ask me questions while I'm live, and I will do my best to answer them as I go. That's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoy this series on the how-to. I'm going to try to make more and more videos, you know, kind of as I get ideas and as I see things that I think need to be answered. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.